Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Jacqueline Coker. My fellow presenters and I are students in the Spring 2022 Environmental Studies Capstone course at the University of Oklahoma. And we are presenting our service project, Environmental Health and Environmental Justice in the John F. Kennedy Neighborhood of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Our capstone instructor is Dr. Casey Jones-Matrona, and her email is listed in case you'd like to contact her. Our other presenters today will be
Tana Brown, Farima Saidi,
Celia Testanegi,
and Eleanor Mendelson.
We would also like to acknowledge our other classmates who are not presenting with us tonight. Lastly, we would like to acknowledge and thank our community partners, the JFK Neighborhood Association, notably President Denavetta Davis, and the Metropolitan Library System.
Before the start of the semester, Dr. Jones-Matrona established relationships with the OU Civil Engineering and Environmental Science instructors and the JFK Neighborhood Association. She gained IRB approval for our class to collect oral histories that would narrate the environmental stressors and lived experiences of JFK residents. Excuse me. So this is our project timeline and list of deliverables. In January and February, we led student research. We created a community engagement ethics plan. We created a literature review, and we did oral history training. In March and April, we did a call for interviews, visual representations collection, interview recording and transcriptions, as well as an interview analysis report. In May, we finalized and sent materials to the JFK Neighborhood Association. We are completing our presentation now. We are drafting a continued engagement plan, and we plan to publish our deliverables with the Metropolitan Library System. These are our literature review methods. The literature review was researched and written collaboratively, class-wide, and used to define environmental justice and injustice, environmental health, and environmental racism. The document is 26 pages in total. We assessed how Oklahomans in the JFK neighborhood have been impacted within the context of these terms, with a focus on the neighborhood's recent history and ongoing environmental issues. These are some literature review key terms that will reappear within the presentation, so I'm going to run y'all by them real fast. Environmental racism is any policy, practice, or directive that affects or disadvantages individuals, groups, or communities based on race. Environmental justice is the principle that all people and communities are entitled to equal environmental protection through public health laws and regulations. Environmental injustice is the disproportionate exposure of communities of color and the poor to pollution and its effects on human health as well as the health of the environment. Environmental injustice also includes unequal rates of environmental protection. Environmental health is the branch of public health that focuses on the interrelationships between people and their environment, with an emphasis on promoting human health and well-being.
For our literature review, we had various sections, but I will go over some select information for brief context. We talked about housing that was impacted by redlining from Jim Crow era laws. We also talked about the Northeast 10th Street segregation line, where African Americans were prohibited from living above. We also talked about the Tulsa Race Massacre that happened in 1921 in the Greenwood District. And we talked about Superfund sites that primarily impact communities of color and heavily impact their overall quality of life. JFK has a unique and rich history. This subdivision was established in 1967, and homes were built from 1967 to 1980. Some of the thriving businesses during this time were the J. Cola Drinking Company and the Jewel Theater. However, environmental stressors have disrupted this neighborhood, and some environmental projects in the JFK district include the examination of Superfund sites, explosion reports, and photo voice projects. For our interview, we came up with methods. We had an engagement plan for our interview section, we came up with consent forms that we all used across the board. We had a safety and community engagement plan that established our values and how we communicate and engage with the JFK members. We had a call for interviews poster to get volunteers for the interviews. And we also had a standardized interview questions sheet. However, we changed the questions depending on who we were interviewing. All in all, our class conducted 6 interviews. These interviews were conducted in residents' homes, places of work, over Zoom, and over the phone. We always made sure to mask when we were in person. All these interviews were recorded, transcribed, and analyzed.
A major theme of the interviews we conducted that was analyzed in our report was the theme of why residents chose to move to the JFK neighborhood or remain there after growing up in the area. One common thing that many residents interviewed cited was the proximity to downtown Oklahoma City, which enabled them to have easy access to I-40 and I-35, easy access to entertainment and activities downtown, and views of the city from home. Other residents cited the sense of community and care in their neighborhood as a reason why they chose to remain there and raise their families. Many spoke to wanting to live in a historically Black neighborhood. We have a clip from an interview with Mr. Lee Rowland, who spoke on this issue.
I love the culture. I love the fact that the people in my community, they share a history that I have, which is in my case a Black history, and take great pride in the history that is worthy of celebration. And they are I don't know, they have pains that we share as well, and so people having that made us feel more comfortable.
Other residents cited wanting to remain in the area because of their family histories. For example, Mr. Hobart Sutton spoke on his family issue in the John F. Kennedy neighborhood.
Well, he sold, the usual things that you have in grocery stores. He eventually, after a few years, he closed it up. He had a lot of people that got food on credit and didn't pay their credit bills. So he opened up a barbecue place. He closed the grocery store and opened up a barbecue place.
Another resident we interviewed, Ms. Kresha Redis, spoke on the feeling of community and care that she felt when she lived within the neighborhood.
Everybody feels like family. We all take care of each other.
Although it was established as a result of Jim Crow laws and redlining, JFK has remained a close-knit community over the years. However, there have been many substantial changes within the community over the last several decades. One is that land is being bought up more for rental properties rather than being owned by families, which has changed the composition of the community and the sense that the neighbors have who live there.
They have not been quick to come to meetings or get to know us or anything. And I think that's a pity, because when people learn other people's culture, they're more empathetic, sympathetic, cooperative.
That was interviewing Ms. Diane McDaniel on the changes in the community over the past decades. There's also been a major change in the building we're in now. The historic Douglas High School was turned into an apartment complex after being vacant since 1994. It is now apartments in a community center called Page Woodson. Despite the many reasons that attracted residents to the JFK neighborhood, there have also been numerous environmental issues that complicate their time living in this neighborhood. One thing that commonly came up in the interviews we conducted was the issue of noise. Loud booms are commonly heard by residents of the JFK neighborhood from surrounding industrial sites. For example, Ms. Krejaretis spoke on this during her interview.
It felt like a car literally crashed into the house. It was that dramatic and traumatic. The unfortunate thing is we've gotten used to them.
Dr. Linda Torre spoke on this as well.
They shake our home. They shake the windows.
And Mr. Lee Rowland.
The blast of it is powerful. It sounds like something has just ran into our garage. A car, it feels like a car just running through it. I've sat in chairs in Zoom meetings upstairs in my home. The chair has literally moved with the blast.
Despite the love that many of these residents have for their community, the noise levels have impacted overall well-being and their quality of life.
Property damage became a topic many residents interviewed were willing to discuss with us on, more specifically structural damage associated with the loud booms. These included cracks on walls within and outside infrastructures, as well as on roads. 4 out of 6 interviewees mentioned this issue, and they were Dr. Torre, Mr. Rowland, Ms. McDaniel, and Ms. Redis. And here I will play a clip of Ms. Redis discussing property damage as evidence.
Just major cracks where the sheet wall would just kind of collapse on itself and then buckle out. We haven't fixed it because we feel like it's evidence.
Next, within our interviews, we discussed health concerns, more specifically air and water quality concerns. Here is Ms. McDaniel discussing her concerns regarding air and water quality.
How many of our older residents have been drinking this water, breathing this air for so long? Now they're dead.
Also within Ms. McDaniel's interview, she discussed how she had a friend come and test her water. Chemicals are found to be at a safe level, but she still questions what is considered safe. Concerns about how air pollution has affected plant life was brought up during our interviews, where Ms. Redis expressed concerns that the food she grows may be negatively affected. Here is Ms. McDaniel discussing some concerns noticed within her garden.
They had this fuzzy, white, powdery, sticky substance on them. And everybody was saying, Ms. Diane, have you noticed something on the leaves? And I touched them, and I even told our president, Davietta, I said, something dusty is about.
In discussions over air quality, Ms. Rita states, we sort of fear the air now. Examples being dust in the air from the surrounding industrial sites and visible haze of smoke.
We want to be able to go outside anytime to just enjoy just being outside. We have to check for air quality. We have to check. There's this odor, and you didn't ask about the odor yet, but there's this odor that when we're going outside now, because masking is so prevalent. Before the masking, before COVID, I would contemplate, should I wear a mask when I go outside to go to the mailbox, because that smell is so strong, or we wouldn't go outside at all. So we sort of fear the air now, which is not, shouldn't happen for anybody.
Dr. Torre also discusses her concerns towards air quality.
We periodically have fires from the recycling plant or a tire plant, and you can just see plumes of smoke everywhere, and it is all over the neighborhood.
With all of these influences, each contribute to residents becoming unable to utilize outdoor spaces due to the air quality concerns.
When asked about environmental injustice in their community, several interviewees mentioned poor air quality as well as being zoned so closely to so many industrial areas. It was also mentioned several times that industrial zones have always been prevalent in Black communities. Many interviewees also believed that there would be more change if the neighborhood were a white or more affluent community. In his research, Mr. Rowland has found that there is an approximately 18-year life expectancy gap between their community and others in Oklahoma. Ms. McDaniel shares her visions for a healthy and prosperous community.
If we're all healthy together, we tend to prosper together.
In regards to their hope for the future, interviewees repeatedly stated their hope for JFK to be a safe place to live and play. They wish to see an increase in arts, entertainment, and businesses. Dr. Torre posits her vision for the future.
I think bringing art shows, bringing musical plays to Paige Woodson to create an atmosphere where there is something to do. There is something to look forward to when you have entertainment, when you have parks and where you can go and take your children and feel safe and they're well cared for. I think that's a reflection of the community and of our city.
Interviewees also noted a distinct need for infrastructure investment for both parking and affordable housing. Further, they wish to see political change and support, as well as increased participation within the neighborhood association. On his knowledge of neighborhood issues, Mr. Guy Roan states,
and then when I got with the neighborhood association and they started talking about these problems, that's when I really became aware of them.
On her desire for future change, Ms. Redis hopes,
I hope that hearts and minds are changed to do the right thing, whoever has the power to make the change, regardless of how much money it costs, because people are more important than money.
And in the final moments of his interview, Mr. Rowland expresses his hope for the future in one simple yet powerful statement.
My hope is on your watch. As you've lived life and seen things through your eyes, I hope you've seen enough that says, this is not right.
We will have a time for discussion and Q&A after both capstone presentations. During that time, we would like your feedback on the potential future of this project and what kinds of research would be beneficial to the JFK neighborhood. Our proposal would be to spend future capstone semesters collecting more oral histories and designating student internships and independent research semesters to this service project.
We would like to give a special thanks to the JFK Neighborhood Association and their president, Ms. Denavetta Davis. All our interviewees, including Ms. Diane McDaniel, Ms. Crescia Redis, Mr. Guy Roan, Mr. Lee Rowland, Mr. Hubbard Sutton, and Dr. Linda Torre. A special thank you to the Metropolitan Library System with Judith Matthews and Buddy Johnson, and the Black Space Urbanist Collective with Vanessa Morrison and Gina Safala. A special thank you to our OU Environmental Study Program and our amazing professor, Dr. Jones Matrona, and our director, Dr. Chattenberg, and Ms. Devonso. A special thank you to the OU Community Engagement Office with Dr. Penley, and of course the OU CES class with Dr. Nairn, Dr. Knox, and Cheyenne Morgan. It truly has been a privilege to serve the JFK neighborhood in the capacity that we have thus far been able to. Thank you to everyone, and thank you for listening.
Looking good. Well, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Finn Jackson, and I study environmental science at OU, where I am a part of the Environmental Engineering and Science Capstone course. This year, our project was to conduct an environmental assessment on the John F. Kennedy neighborhood, which, as we just heard from our peers in the Environmental Studies course, is a residential development adjacent to heavy industrial activity. Gotta love technology. I'll tell you a little bit more about our presentation or our project rather, and then discuss the methods that we used in our sampling and analysis. And then we're gonna hear from 3 different teams this evening. Those are the Pollution Evolution Engineering Consultants, Knox Your Average Engineering, and Down to Earth Environmental, whose logos can be seen just there. And then we'll wrap things up with the conclusions of our study. So our capstone course has been a year long. It began last fall where we were placed into teams. And in those teams, we studied the John F. Kennedy neighborhood and visited it. And then we wrote some technical project documents. Those included a quality assurance project plan, health and safety plan, sampling and analysis plan, and a project work plan. And then this spring, we evaluated existing environmental data sets for the neighborhood, and we also generated our own. Then we analyzed and interpreted those data. We studied remedial technologies that are available, and tonight we'll be providing you with a suite of solutions. So I'd like to speak a little bit more on the neighborhood. My clicker is working. So we've got the John F. Kennedy neighborhood here outlined in the yellow, and some additional areas of outdoor interest are in purple. So we've got Washington Park here, the high school here, and a golf course here. And then in red, we have those historic Superfund sites, and in black are areas where heavy industrial activity is occurring. So as we've heard, residents of the neighborhood have been reporting a variety of environmental stressors for years. These include loud noise events, and we saw a photo in the other presentation of the log that they've been keeping since about 2016. And they also report dust, smoke, and odors. So the objective of our project was to perform a holistic environmental assessment of the neighborhood and to address those concerns by studying water, air, noise, and soil. So here again, we have the John F. Kennedy neighborhood outlined there in yellow. And if you look to the south of this map is I-40. Just north here is Reno. And this blue triangle is where we sampled for surface water. This is a tributary that discharges into the Oklahoma River. And we sampled for several things. So we tested for nutrients, metals, solids, and oxygen in the water to give us an idea of what kind of aquatic life this source could support. And we also tested for the presence of coliform bacteria. We were unable to find any accessible groundwater monitoring wells in the neighborhood from which we could sample. And it's also important to note that residents are supplied water by the city, and this is not the water that we sampled. Moving on to air, here in the pink stars are where we installed air monitors. These devices were made by Purple Air. You can see one of my colleagues installing one here. Now these monitors were collecting information on the concentration of PM2.5 in the air. And when we say PM2.5, we're referring to particles that are 2.5 microns or less in diameter. This is 30 times smaller than the width of a human hair. They're too small to be seen by the human eye, but they do contribute to haziness in the air, and it's this size category of airborne particles that are most concerning for human health. Moving on to noise, you can see in the 5 yellow dots here, these are where we had noise monitors. And here's a photo of one. These monitors had to be kept indoors, and they only stored sound level at 9-hour increments. So while we only had 5 locations where these were installed, we actually had 6 monitors. One volunteer had 2. They had one operating during the day and one operating during the night. And these collected sound level and decibels. So to provide some frame of reference, here's a figure with some decibel levels of some common sounds. So starting at the low end of the scale, a normal conversation at about 50 decibels. If we move a little bit higher, imagine at a loud rock concert, this would be about 110 decibels. And then sort of tipping the scale here, if we're in very close proximity to a jet engine or a fireworks show, these are going to be in the 130 to 140 decibel range. And then lastly, we studied soil. So here in the green squares, you can see 12 locations. We sampled at all 12 of those, and we took 14 samples that included 2 duplicates. We analyzed the soil for metals, moisture and organic content, particle size in our laboratory, and we sent 3 samples to a commercial laboratory to study the PAH and TPH. These are those long words down here. These would be byproducts from combustion and petroleum activity. And here's a map again with all of the locations in the same place. And now we're going to hear the most significant findings and results from all 3 of our teams. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Nydia Lampkin to the stage to present for the Pollution Evolution Engineering Consultants.
Thank you, Fen. Good evening, everyone. I will be introducing Pollution Evolution Engineering Consultants, or PEEC. Our team consists of Rachel Vo, myself, Nydia Lampkin, Sean Williams, Matthew Dietz, and Julian Mogel. And for discussing our results, we'll be specifically looking at air and soil quality because through our thorough data analysis, we found that water and soil were of no concern. And make sure that I said air and noise quality. So specifically looking at our results for air, we have the JFK Neighborhood PM 2.5 Air Quality Index figure, or AQI, where that quantitatively assesses the air quality within a given location. And so here we have the PM 2.5 AQI on the y-axis and then the date on the x-axis. And something to note here is that we only monitored from February to March. And so this is the data that we collected and plotted from all 3 of the monitors within the JFK neighborhood. And if we plot this on a color-coordinated indexing system that qualitatively assesses the air quality from good to very unhealthy, we notice that for the JFK neighborhood, it stays between good to moderate, with a few peaks into the unhealthy for sensitive groups. And sensitive groups include those who have compromised immune systems. And as we further assess our data, we do have a few outliers. However, this was from one single monitor and it did not coincide with the other 2. And so therefore it's safe to assume that these peaks were due to outside factors that were confined to a small area. And so overall for the JFK neighborhood, the air quality is between good to moderate. And so here we just have a figure to show the JFK neighborhood compared to the northern Oklahoma City PM 2.5 AQI daily average. And we have that daily average on the y-axis and the date on the x-axis. And what we wanted to show you all here was just the similar trends between the 2, and they follow that same trend. And so that makes us feel confident in our data that we collected. And so as far as our results for noise, here's a figure that shows the sound level in decibels and then the time on the x-axis. And so it is important to note here that we monitored for about a month's time, and these monitors recorded on a 9-hour interval. And so this is just a portion of that data. And so within that month, we recorded 1 noise event indicated by the red at about 60 decibels. And another thing to remember is that these monitors were indoors, and so therefore the source of this 60 decibels would be significantly larger or louder than where the monitor was placed at the Oklahoma City Housing Authority, or Oklahoma Housing Authority. And how we deemed a noise event was on a time interval basis. So if the sound level increased immediately and decreased immediately, that was considered a noise event. So moving forward to our assessment criteria for our recommendations we'll be providing shortly. we made sure that necessity and cost were a top priority. So was there a need for intervention? What are the capital costs and what are its operation and maintenance? And then we followed that with its effectiveness, its community acceptance, its ease of implementation, and then its sustainability. So overall, we just wanted to provide a plan that was necessary and affordable that would achieve long-term success. And so for our recommendations for air quality, if you're still concerned about your health in respect to the air quality within the JFK neighborhood, we advise that you place purple air monitors, similar to the ones that we used in our assessment, to monitor that PM 2.5 within the neighborhood, especially over a longer period of time, since we only did monitor between February and March. And you can access this data on the Purple Air Map website via phone, a computer, or possibly a monitor that is set up in your neighborhood that you guys can visit. And then in addition, we also want you to notify residents whenever elevated air quality indexing does occur. So what this would look like is if the air quality was in the unhealthy for sensitive groups, you would just advise the sensitive groups to stay indoors until air quality improves. And so the cost per monitor would be $249, and we advise just to place 2 to 3 at various locations within the JFK neighborhood. And then the annual energy expense per monitor would be less than $1. And so now I'm going to show you an example of what you can find on the Purple Air Map website. This was taken from Edmond, Oklahoma. And looking at the figure to your right, you can see the one-day average US EPA PM 2.5 AQI. And this provides just a real-time quantitative value of what the air quality looks like, as well as a description of what that number entails. And then in addition, it provides the real-time 10-minute to 30-minute to hourly rates as well. And so if you were to place these monitors within your neighborhood and register them to this website, this is data that you can access for free using Wi-Fi. And so if you look to the figure to your left, this just provides the one-day average over time. Here in this example was from May 2021 to March 2022, and you're able to just assess over about a year's time of what the air quality was. And so lastly, for our recommendation for noise, we did record one noise event, so that would show reason for further studies in noise and vibration activity within the area. We did only record for about a month for noise, and so we suggest that noise monitoring over a longer time to truly assess the activity that's going on within the area would be most beneficial, in addition to a preliminary study of seismic activity, which is the shaking of the ground. Now, the reason why we're discussing seismic activity is there was a concern by the residents, as seen in the presentation before, of damages to homes and property. And so this would just provide a background knowledge to see if there are any seismic activity going on within the area by investigating the material that is susceptible to that vibrational damage. And then it will provide a report of potential causes of structural damage. And so essentially, this is just a preliminary assessment before any field analysis can occur. And so here I just want to show you all a table that shows the correlation between the ground vibration level in inches per second and the effect on buildings. And so as the ground vibration level increases, so does the risk of damage to homes or buildings. And so the cost for this evaluation and report by an independent consulting firm would be an initial cost of $10,000. And then for the long-term noise monitoring, we advise that you use the indoor noise meter similar to the ones we used, and those cost $259 per meter. And the reason why we advise indoor versus outdoor is because outdoor meters are a little more expensive than the indoor ones. And so overall, this would just provide helpful data if you were to push for a regulatory change. And so what we wanted to do, Pollution Evolution Engineering Consultants, was provide you all with a long-term monitoring plan for air and noise quality. So now I would like to pass it to Jessica to discuss her team's results and observations.
Hello, I'm Jessica. I am quite a bit shorter than Dee. I am representing KYA, or Knocks Your Average Engineering. This is just a brief overview of our team's organizational structure. So we have Kayla Benner, Paul Bauman, Brent Polis, Presley Stevens, Nasser Al-Razbi, and myself. So our significant results are going to focus on noise. So if you look at the x-axis of this figure, you can see time ranging from 9 a.m. until noon. and on the y-axis, you have the sound level in decibels. There's a clear jump just before 10 a.m. on March 1st, at which the sound level meters recorded a 60 decibel noise event. This meter was located at the Oklahoma City Housing Authority, where the employees characterized it as a large noise event. And it's for this reason that we believe this to be representative of what the neighborhood has been experiencing for years. In order to better understand this noise event, we performed a sound attenuation analysis. So if you can imagine, these hands are going to represent a noise event, and you can see the sound level is going to decrease over distance until it is picked up by something such as the human ear. Now, for our calculations, we have our noise meter, which recorded our 60 decibel noise event. And in order to calculate how loud the noise would be were it coming from various distances, we performed a back calculation. So as you can tell, the further away the sound is from the source, the louder it needs to be to register that 60 decibels. Here's a map of what that ended up looking like, and it is crucial to keep in mind that the center blue marker on the map is actually representing our sound level meter, and the rings are going to represent the possible sources at various distances. So were the sound coming from the highway, it would need to be as loud as 112 decibels. We know, however, that the sound of average highway traffic is between 70 and 80 decibels. Therefore, our team found it likely that the noise was originating somewhere within the orange ring, which is actually where all of the industry lies. Okay. So if you guys remember, we were saying that if the sound were originating from the highway, it would be coming from this red outer ring, and it would need to be as loud as 112 decibels. However, we know that highway traffic isn't that loud. It's only in the range of 70 to 80 decibels. Therefore, my team found it likely that it's coming within the orange ring and would be as loud as 108 decibels. Yeah, so it's also important to keep in mind that these calculations are most definitely underestimates because we did not take into account the existing sound wall that just went up, as well as the fact that the sound level monitors were indoors. For this reason, we are going to be recommending changing local regulation. Oklahoma City currently has L90 and L10 limits for industrial zones, and what this means is that the noise ordinances in place only apply to average levels of sound over a period of time, whether that is 90% of a day or 10% of a day. We know that the noise events experienced by the JFK neighborhood are very loud. However, we also know they are very brief. For this reason, we are going to be recommending implementing a single event noise ordinance of 90 decibels at the source. These single event noise ordinances are common in the aviation industry. For example, Sacramento Executive Airport has had a single event noise ordinance of 84 decibels for around 30 years. We are also going to be considering options for attenuation technologies, including green barriers and green walls. Again, if you can imagine, this is your noise event with the existing sound wall in place, and this is what that could look like were there vegetation to further reduce the impact of the sound. On your left, you're going to see images of green barriers, and on the right, you can see a semi-intensive green wall, and all that this means is that the plants are incorporated into the structure of the wall. In order to evaluate these different options, we looked at overall cost, effectiveness, public acceptance, and longevity, and these are the weights that we assigned to each of those categories. So if you look at this table, you are going to see effectiveness, longevity, and overall cost estimates for each of the three options. The first being the green barrier from seedlings, the second is a green barrier from trees, and the third is the semi-intensive green wall. If you look at the first row in white, you will see decibel reduction, which is how we calculated our effectiveness. For the green barriers, this is going to range from 5 to 15 decibels, whereas the semi-intensive green wall is more consistent with a range of 10 to 15 decibels. This range will be influenced by things such as the plant species, the height of the plant, and the frequency of the noise. If you look at the last row, you can see the overall cost estimate, with the green barrier from seedlings having the lowest. This table is going to summarize the scores that we gave to each of those options, with the green barrier from seedlings scoring the highest. Looking briefly at the green barrier design, you can see the existing sound wall with its dimensions. From the top, you can see the trees and shrubs directly in front of the wall. And then from the side, you can see the trees eventually growing to be taller than the wall itself in around 20 years. So our final recommendations are going to include the green barrier from seedlings along the sound wall, with additional trees by roads and train tracks. Not only will this further reduce the sound, but it will also provide some dust reduction in the neighborhood. We're also going to recommend implementing a single event noise ordinance of 90 decibels at the source. Thank you. You will now be hearing from James from Down to Earth Environmental.
Thank you, Jessica. All right, let's see how much more technology we can mess with. Okay, we're working. I'm James Queen. I'll be presenting on behalf of Down to Earth Environmental. We are composed of myself, Finn Jackson, Freddie Vega, Ronnie Salter, Steinar Dale, J.D. Epperson, and Yezhang Yu. So what did we find? After extensive analyses, we were able to determine that our water sample was indeed urban stormwater runoff. Stormwater runoff is not largely regulated, but this is not clean water. It's not something you want your dog swimming in, but we did not find anything that warranted further investigation. Likewise, surprisingly, with our soil samples, again, we didn't find anything that warranted further investigation in the samples that we collected. We conclude that neither of these media pose an environmental concern to the residents of John F. Kennedy. We bring in our air quality data. You've seen a similar figure. The x-axis here is time in days. The y-axis is our average hourly PM 2.5. This is in micrograms per cubic meter. The three different colors represent our three different monitors. We have a yellow, a blue, and a red. If you'll notice in red, that one did not get plugged in until February 27th. I provide this figure just to show the strong correlation between the measurements of our monitors. It gives us a high level of confidence in the data that we're generating. And if we bring in data from Oklahoma City's air quality monitors, we see very similar trends. We see the same spikes. We see the same day-night swings. But the important part is that the Oklahoma City concentrations are routinely higher than what we measured inside John F. Kennedy neighborhood. With these data, we conclude that the air quality inside JFK with concern to PM 2.5 during the time that we monitored is as good, if not better, than the air quality in John F. Kennedy neighborhood. There are a lot of asterisks in that sentence. We were just monitoring PM 2.5, and we only did it for a month. We'll come back to that in just a moment. Sound level. My colleagues have discussed this in great detail, so I will be brief here. This is the one that we caught just above 60 decibels. We performed a similar sound attenuation modeling. We made the bold assumption that we knew exactly where it was coming from. We assumed that this is coming from directly behind the recently constructed noise barrier. It's a bold assumption, but we made it, and with our model, we estimate that at the source, that event would have been right at 145 decibels. To remind you, that's about 100 feet away from a jet engine, 5 feet away from a fireworks display. So we do have recommendations for further study. It should be noted that no one in John F. Kennedy neighborhood complained about PM 2.5. They did not voice concerns about PM 2.5. They voiced concerns about a visible dust, a dust that you could see, a dust that accumulated on surfaces. That's not PM 2.5, that's coarse particulate matter, which we refer to as PM 10. If we wanted to have an idea of what the air quality really is like inside this neighborhood, we would need to conduct PM 10 monitoring, which was way beyond the amount of money we had to spend for this. It's very expensive to do. Likewise, if we wanted to know what was in that dust, we could conduct wipe sampling or a similar method, and that would give us an idea of the composition in addition to the concentration. As mentioned prior, our noise monitors are located indoors. That's not ideal. It would be preferable to have something outdoors continually monitoring. And if we wanted to validate the concerns, the very real concerns that these noise events are causing structural damage, we would need to conduct seismic monitoring to measure the vibrations in the ground. All that being said, we did identify one environmental concern through our literature review. And I'll take you to a zoning map. This is Oklahoma City's zoning map. To the north, we have Northeast 4th Street. This is Washington Park in yellow. the large purple area labeled I-3, that is a heavy industrial district. Let's take a look at what's inside this I-3 district. In this lower left-hand corner, you have a concrete batch plant. To the east, you'll see a recycling yard. Just across the train tracks from that recycling yard, you'll see an asphalt plant. And to give us an even better idea of what can happen inside of an I-3 zone, we'll look at the definition provided by the Oklahoma City Code of Ordinances. I'm not going to read this to you, but I will highlight activities inside these zones are expected to produce relatively high levels of noise, vibration, smoke, dust, odor, or light, and as such, should be located downwind and as far away as possible from residential and most commercial uses. I will repeat, they should be located downwind and as far away as possible from residential and most commercial uses. That's not always possible. As our friends from environmental studies mentioned, it's very common to see these industrial areas adjacent to communities of color. And what you'll often find in those instances is some sort of buffer zone. And we find that here. Just to orient ourselves, this is the concrete batch plant I just showed you previously. This is the train tracks. Just north of that, we have 4 completely vacant city blocks. And if you look overall, it's closer to 15 city blocks that are mostly vacant. Give us an idea of where this vacant property sits inside of Oklahoma City. We're a half a mile away from Bricktown Ballpark. We're 0.6 miles away from the Boathouse District. And we're about a 1-mile bike ride away from the Paycom Center. Yet we have 15 nearly vacant lots. We recommend a proper buffer zone. Now, buffer zones are common in these situations. We're recommending a vegetative buffer zone, something about 50 foot thick. And these have been shown to mitigate dust and noise from heavy industrial activity. If it's planned properly, you can incorporate bike paths and pedestrian paths. In this case, that would increase connectivity between JFK and Bricktown, Deep Deuce, and the existing Innovation District. These large vegetative zones have shown to have what's called an urban green space cooling effect. And they also increase or improve mental health because people do really enjoy being next to trees. Our conceptual design consists of evergreens and native grasses. These areas in neon green here are where we propose to place this 50-foot vegetative border. I'll point out this is not a contiguous border, but the idea is to fit this in where we can with minimal disruption to the current activities in the area. If we get 50 feet everywhere that you see in bright green there, comes out to about 14 acres of vegetation. For 20,000 an acre, you can put in somewhat mature trees. These are not full-grown trees, but they're not saplings. So you would have an immediate impact, and that would increase over the years. And at 50 cents a square foot, we think that this is a very reasonably priced mitigation measure. But mitigation is not elimination. If we want to eliminate the environmental concern, we have to think a little bigger, and we have to think about rezoning. We highly recommend considering rezoning the current I-3 district into a Riverside Business District and Park. Now, this solution would eliminate the environmental concerns associated with that industrial activity. It would eliminate the large vehicle traffic that services those industries on a daily basis. And depending on what replaces it, there is a wide array of potential economic, social, and environmental benefits to Oklahoma City. However, there is a huge pink elephant in the room. If we take a look at the existing I-3 zones outlined in blue here, this is about 400 acres, and it's not 400 vacant acres. That's 400 acres of existing industry. And these are essential businesses. A lot of these are cornerstones of the construction industry in Oklahoma City, and we need to have them around. Furthermore, we don't have any reason to believe that no one's operating outside of their permits. It seems that everyone is doing exactly what they're permitted to do, exactly where they're permitted to do it. That being said, relocation would have to be financially incentivized. And this is not cheap, this is a significant hurdle, but we believe it can be overcome. And if it can be overcome, Oklahoma City has proven that they know what to do with properties like this. I'll give you 2 prime examples. Scissortail Park and Bricktown Canal and Business District. A lot of people in the room are familiar with these. These are publicly funded, debt-free renovations that transform pieces of property that we all used to avoid into sources of local pride. Somehow they both come in at $44 a square foot, So I will liberally borrow that figure of $44 a square foot and bring it back to our proposal. As I mentioned before, 400 acres. I'll do quick math for you. 400 acres at $44 a square foot is $7 billion. I'm not proposing $7 billion. We are proposing that Oklahoma City take responsibility for about 25 of those acres. At $44 a square foot, it's about a $50 million budget, and with that 25 acres, create public spaces and reinvigorate the area to encourage private development on the remaining 375 acres. And we do believe that with this private development on the remaining 375 acres, we could recoup the cost of that relocation of the existing industry. This is the view right now. This is just north of Reno, looking back at Oklahoma City downtown. We really hope that one day soon, it can look a lot like this. I'm going to hand it back to Finn for our conclusions.
Thank you to Dee, Jessica, and James. So just to recap our findings, PEEC recommends that the neighborhood install purple air monitors, which are what we used in our assessment. Those are $249 for each sensor, and they accrue minimal energy expenses at under $1 per year per sensor. And they also recommend that an environmental engineering consultant firm do a noise and vibration study, a paper study starting at about $10,000, and that residents can also buy the indoor noise meters that we used. They were $259 a piece. KYA recommends a change in local regulation. They'd like to see a single event noise ordinance be implemented, and as they said, this has been done before. They'd also like to see a green barrier be installed along the sound wall. This would have a 100-year cost of just under $380,000. And Down to Earth Environmental recommended a vegetative buffer zone with an initial cost of about $300,000, but ultimately to rezone the I-3 district. This would cost the city of Oklahoma City about $50 million, and the cost of private development and relocation of those operating industries there would be very significant. There are several people that this project would not have been possible without. Of course, the John F. Kennedy Neighborhood Association and President Denevetta Davis, and the several families within the neighborhood that volunteered their property and time to us to assist in the project. We'd also like to thank Mr. Daniel Ross from the Department of Environmental Quality, who came and spoke to us about air quality, as well as the Center for Restoration of Ecosystems and Watersheds at OU for letting us borrow their laboratory and their grad students, especially Ms. Cheyenne Morgan, our graduate teaching assistant, and our two professors, Dr. Knox and Nairn, as well as Dr. Casey Jones-Matrona in the Environmental Studies course, and all of you for joining us this evening. We will have a joint question and answer session with both classes after a 15-minute intermission.